Welcome to the Becoming Superhuman podcast, where we interview extraordinary people to bring you the skills and strategies to overcome the impossible. And now, here's your host, Jonathan Levy.
Greetings, super friends, and welcome to this week's show. We're excited to have you, which is to say, I'm excited to have you. And I'm excited to tell you about this week's guest. And after that, we can get right into it. So, to be honest, I don't know if I've ever met someone that I have so much in common with. Like myself, he started out in entrepreneurship at the very young age of 12. And he was also building websites for his father's business associates, which some of you guys may know is how I got started in entrepreneurship. Although this guest today was a little bit more successful at it, and he kept parlaying his success into more and more ventures. So in his former life, he was actually a successful property development and real estate entrepreneur doing green architecture and property development. And then one day, he was diagnosed with an incurable disease that you guys may or may not have heard of called Crohn's. From there, he decided to use yoga and nutrition and herbal remedies to try and treat himself. And shockingly, he did it. He managed to overcome Crohn's. He managed to go on and run triathlons. Just incredible, incredible story. In the process of doing all this, he founded a company and a blog called Less Doing, More Living. And there he works on making every task in life and in business more efficient. In fact, he's been called the most efficient man alive. And after this interview, you guys, I believe it. He's also written a ton of books on biohacking, on productivity, on optimization, and much, much more. So given the courses I'm teaching and the stuff I like to talk about on this show, you guys can imagine we had lots to talk about. Though it did take us a little bit of time to get into that and to kind of break the ice. So I apologize if it seems to start a little bit slow. Anyways, we cover everything from how he manages to work 2 days a week to what supplements he's using, how everyday people like you and I can outsource aspects of our lives to get better results and less stress. I know we want to hear about that. And you'll also hear about what productivity tools both he and I most recommend. So there's a lot of good stuff in here. Why don't we just get into it? Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Ari Meisel. Mr. Ari, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, John.
Yeah, I'm sorry for the very brief, I guess you would say, setup. Normally, like to do small talk and all that good stuff, but you're a very busy man, very busy and very productive man, so I didn't want to waste any more of your time than I need to get this awesome episode on the road. So
thank you for that.
I appreciate it. So let me start by saying, Ari, we have a ton of overlap in both our interests and our careers. We both started doing web design at age 12. We both launched into quote unquote careers, and then we both decided that helping people on the internet was going to be perhaps more interesting. So I know my path, I know how I got here, but let me ask you how you became a best-selling author and how you went from a real estate entrepreneur to an internet personality and a TEDx speaker and all that good stuff.
Okay, sure. So my first company was 12. I started a couple others before I graduated high school, and they were all in tech. But then I got out of college and I started working in construction and real estate development, which was an amazing learning experience and very, very hard work. And after a couple of years of that, sort of the lifestyle I was living really caught up with my body, and I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease, which, for those who don't know, is a chronic inflammatory condition that affects the digestive tract. It's very, very painful, and it's considered to be incurable. And after nearly dying from the combination of the illness and the medicine, I went on a long journey of self-tracking and self-experimentation, and I got off my meds and was declared free of the illness after several months.
Wow.
A big part of that was overcoming stress. And to do that, I was faced with the question of basically, what would you do if you could only work an hour a day? And that was a real question for me because I was so weak and sick that happened several times. And I had to figure out ways to not only get everything done, but to get more done than I ever had before so that I could continue to thrive. And that meant completely reinventing things. So I created a completely new methodology of productivity called Less Doing to help people optimize, automate, and outsource everything in their lives.
I love that. And I especially love it because I actually, about a half a year ago, also built a course, although mine was more around how do I do so much? So how do I do more, and how do I automate, and how do I optimize? So I guess tell me about Less Doing and how you're approaching teaching productivity and efficiency online.
So I started out teaching in person with Skillshare, actually. So Skillshare started several years ago as a platform to let anybody teach anything to anyone.
Yeah, I have a couple courses on there, actually.
Okay, cool. So originally it was all in person. Basically, I started with the idea that I wanted to write a book. And to do that, I was like, I have to test the content. So I taught a class. The first time I taught it was to like 8 people. I think they paid $10 each. And it was great, though. And then shortly thereafter, within a month or two, I was teaching every 2 weeks to 40 people per class. And it was great. And after one class, somebody approached me and asked if sorry, the siren in the background.
No problem. We see that you are in New York City.
Yes. And I'm also on the 20th floor, so that's pretty loud.
Wow.
So they came up to me and asked if I do private coaching, and I didn't at the time, but I was like, yeah, totally. And this is how much it costs, and this is how often we'll talk, and blah, blah.
Oh, man, a true entrepreneur. First, by testing the materials, and second, by selling something before it's ready. I love that.
Yeah, before it even begins to exist.
Exactly.
And it worked. And then I started to learn a lot more about what people's needs are and what affected people's productivity, which the more and more I do this, I find is just so much more psychologically based than I ever originally thought. Then basically I created the book from one of my classes. So essentially I filmed one of my classes, gave it to a ghostwriter and said, make a book. And I did. And then I gave a talk at an event, and there was an editor from Penguin there, and we got talking, and I was like, the manuscript's all done. So he was like, really? Well, here it is. And that was that.
I love it because that's the exact process I took. Takes the course. I think once you've thought out a course and you've actually thought out how entertaining is this going to be to people watching my face for hours and hours, then converting it to the book is actually the easier part, especially with a great ghostwriter.
Yes, absolutely. And, the interesting thing about that is that I've outsourced thousands and thousands of things at this point. And the 2 times that I've had a real negative experience with outsourcing were both with ghostwriters.
Really?
Yeah. And so the interesting thing, though, is, and I teach people this, that I am firmly of the belief that if you outsource something to a competent outsourcing provider and they make a mistake, then it is 90% of the time it's your fault.
Totally.
Yeah, because you didn't properly communicate your needs or what you wanted or whatever. And that was the case. And basically, the first time I was like, here's 9 blog posts I wrote, and here's a couple podcasts, and here's this and this, and, make a book. And the result was awful. But when I finally was like, look, here is a video of me talking for 2.5 hours about this content, cohesive manner, turn that into a book, that was that.
Yeah, it's totally an art and a skill. And actually, it's funny you mentioned that because this week I've had Anthony Metivier, who also teaches online courses here in Tel Aviv. And we've been building a course on, how do I go from being a public speaker to a blogger, to a podcaster, to an online course teacher, to how do you branch out and succeed in all these mediums? And it ultimately breaks down to the methods. So I think that's really interesting. And clearly you and I have a lot to talk about offline that's not superhuman related. Let me ask you this, Ari. What are those thousands of things that you've outsourced? Give me some of the big ones that might surprise people, or the ones that you think everyone should be outsourcing.
Well, let me think. Surprise people. Well, I'll tell you one of the big ones. The majority of my podcasting process is outsourced and automated. So it used to take me 15 hours of my own time to do an episode. And now it takes an hour, and I get to do 2 episodes a week instead of 1 episode every 6 weeks like I used to do.
Right.
And all of that has to do with outsourcing. I think that one of the things that, I don't know if it's surprising necessarily, but I do a lot of redundancy with outsourcing, especially with virtual assistants. And what I mean by that is I'll have a virtual assistant create a blog post, and then I'll have another virtual assistant check the blog post.
Oh, cool.
The tasks are almost the same, but it's very similar. I got that idea a while ago when I saw how Amazon Mechanical Turk works. For those who are maybe not familiar, Amazon has this Mechanical Turk service where you literally can have people do things that are 5-cent jobs.
Sure.
It's as simple as click on this button, and that's the task. Or does this picture contain nudity? The kind of things that people have to do. But what Amazon Mechanical Turk will typically do is they'll issue the exact same task to 3 people. And if the results don't match up, then it gets kicked back into the pool and it's done again.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
What kind of stuff, I guess I could geek out with you all day on outsourcing, but since we probably have thousands of people listening, what kind of stuff in your experience, I mean, you wrote a book about this for the everyday person, not just the podcaster. What kind of stuff do you think people can outsource in their daily lives? I mean, the average individual looking to find more time, where are the quick wins?
So everybody deals with email, right? That's a big one for people. That seems to be up and down the chain, like that connects people, right? So I created a process a while ago called the human autoresponder. And essentially, autoresponders suck. So they're just not efficient. Either it just says, I'm on vacation till this time, which is, okay, fine. Or it'll be like, if you need to contact this person, like it's too much information. So what I did was I created an Evernote document with about 50 different pieces of information that would or could be in an autoresponder. Everything from, if it's a billing issue, then this is the person. If someone wants a headshot and a bio, this is where they go. If somebody's interested in a consultation, go. And basically, if I get an email from my website or matching certain keywords, then that email will not even go to me. It will go directly to a virtual assistant with a link to that notebook. And it'll basically say, look, use this information to craft a personalized response, providing them the answer that they need.
That's brilliant. And I think that's something that really any of us could do.
Yes.
If we're in a high functioning job where people are asking the same question 100 times, it's maybe not possible to set the Google autoresponder up automatically, but it could certainly forward it to a human.
Well, and the thing that's nice about that is I've literally had people write back to me, this is so great, thank you, because they got a very personal response, and they also got a response faster than they would have gotten it from me. That's my goal, is that, yes, I can certainly respond to all of my emails. I'm very efficient with email. It's not a problem. But I'm not dealing with email all day long. And I'm not one of the people that does email twice a day or claims that they do email twice a day when they really don't. But at the same time, if an assistant can answer your question even an hour before I can, then I want you to have that answer as quick as possible. You don't need a personal answer from me if I can give you the answer quicker.
Sure. And I think one of the things I always tell people, because there's this perception of you're outsourcing for daily tasks or your personal life, that you can come off as kind of a prima donna and you can come off as this kind of holier than thou egoist who thinks that certain tasks are beneath them. And it's not about that. It's like my assistant does a better job finding guests that come on this show. He found Meisel, ladies and gentlemen, and told me, you got to have this guy on your show. I wouldn't have found you. And furthermore, my editor does a better job editing the podcast. So it's about creating a better experiences for your customers or your friends or your family or whoever it is you're interacting with.
Right, exactly.
I find that very, very interesting. Ari, I want to change gears a little bit and come back to more of the physical superhuman stuff, because you have written a book on biohacking. You've written books on how you overcame Crohn's. I'll say this. I'm a huge believer that restoring your body to its healthy, optimal state with exercise and diet and all that good stuff, that's a given. I don't think you have to convince anyone on that. But you also mention stress, and you also mention in your blog a little bit about herbal remedies that you found very effective for resolving these kinds of digestive issues associated with Crohn's. Tell me a bit about that, and also tell me, how did you decrease the stress?
So the diet stuff turned out to be pretty straightforward. I mean, I've replicated these results in a lot of other people with Crohn's. And the general thing that I found that works for people with Crohn's, as well as a lot of inflammatory conditions, is to eat a diet that is high in fat and low in sugar. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't mean it's gluten-free. It doesn't mean it's low carb necessarily, but essentially high fat, low sugar, and high good fats, so olive oil, grass-fed butter, grass-fed beef, pasture egg yolks, avocados, that kind of stuff. And then low sugar is obvious, low sugar. Sugar is inflammatory, and you want to try to limit it as much as possible. So that's the basic thing. For supplements, it was sort of a three-part thing, which was probiotics, vitamin D, and krill oil. And there's a ton of other supplements that I played around with. Some were helpful, some were really not helpful. But those are the three that are really important, I find, especially the probiotics, because so much of it is about gut health and gut bacteria and your microbiome.
Right.
And especially in the Western world, we just don't eat enough fermented foods to have sort of a good supply of bad creepy crawlies.
Oh, man, I'm glad you mentioned that, actually. How do you feel about kombucha?
I don't think that the risk is worth the reward.
Really? I'm surprised to hear you say that. Risk of contamination, risk of...
Yes, this is what scares me about kombucha. So first of all, the commercially made kombucha, anything that you're getting in a bottle is total BS. That's like commercial yogurt. Yeah. So, I mean, commercial yogurt is the same thing. You have to eat like 11 pints of yogurt from Stony Brook to get anywhere near the beneficial bacteria that you could get. So kombucha is the same thing commercially. When you make it yourself, I just think that there's too much of a risk, yes, of contamination. But even without contamination, there are like 7 compounds. There are 7 antibiotics that kombucha produces that we can't even identify.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's been about 3 cases of people getting mold poisoning. And then, of course, there's the whole aspect of contamination with fruit fly larvae and stuff like that. But no, I brew my own stuff. Actually, I just gave Anthony a SCOBY as well. And I brew basically under my sink kombucha. I make sure that it's clean, sterile, all that stuff. And so far, knock on wood, I've had a very good experience. I find it to be really, really good for the gut and for the joints, particularly.
Yeah, I mean, if you do it right. But honestly.
Yeah, there's a lot of sanitation involved.
Yes, exactly. So again, and it's also, I mean, maybe it's not so bad for you now that you do it regularly, but I think it's a lot of work for possible benefits. So
I'm going to have to FedEx you a SCOBY, Ari, because I spend like about an hour a week and I get this really, really high quality stuff. And I don't know, it becomes like brewing beer. It becomes a hobby more than anything.
All right. Yeah. Hey.
All right. I'll see if I can FedEx one from abroad. So, all right. If I understand this correctly, you beat Crohn's with stress reduction, the krill oil, the diet, the exercise, all that good stuff. And then at that point, somewhere along the way, you ran an Ironman. And then you come up with this book, Less Doing, More Living, and come up with this philosophy that we still haven't completely covered. So tell me about less doing. I mean, what does that mean besides outsourcing?
So it's really about freeing up your time so that you can do the things you want to do, which may be as simple as using your brain to think of new ideas. I find that a lot of people feel overwhelmed nowadays, or that's the big buzzword, and they try to be busy just to be busy. And it's like a culture that we've developed that wants people to just work till they die, essentially, because that's impressive. But it's really not. In a lot of ways, I think that that's actually the lazy route, because anybody can just keep shoveling. You can just keep digging. But to think of another way to do things in a smarter way requires more work in some situations. I think that by freeing up the time, you can do the things you want to do, and whether that's coming up with a new idea for a business or just being happier or being able to pick your kids up from school, whatever that might be, that's what I want for people.
Absolutely. And even if that is sitting down and thinking about the things that you do in your daily interactions, in your daily processes that don't need to get done, right? Because that's a big one. There's a lot of stuff that we do every day. Check our bank account every single day. Well, you don't need to do that. Check it every week. Check it every month. So there's a lot of wasted time, I find.
Yeah, a big thing that I talk about with people in terms of organization, and a lot of the aspects of this system actually, is setting limits. And usually I try to push people, actually not usually, always, I try to push people to set artificially restrictive limits. So yeah, what you just said, I'm only allowed to check my finances once a week, or I'm only allowed to check email 4 times a day, or I'm only allowed to have this one shelf for shoes, whatever it might be. Setting artificially restrictive limits is a really interesting way to force yourself to come up with new methods.
Yeah, and particularly with time, right? It's the whole Parkinson's law thing that work will expand to fill essentially the time you allow it.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, what are some of your favorite tools? I saw in one of the subtitles of your books, you recommend IFTTT, which I love and I use. You talked about Evernote, which I'm using right now for the questions. But what are some other tools that you just can't live without for productivity?
Well, my number one recommendation for years now has been a service called followup.cc.
Oh, I love that. I'm so glad you said
it. So it is my number one. It's so for people who don't know, followup.cc is an automated email reminder service. Very, very simple. All it does is you send an email to any time period you want at followup.cc. So it could be 3 days at followup.cc, or 1 week at followup.cc, or Monday, 5 p.m. at followup.cc. And when that time period comes around, that email will come back to your inbox, and it will now include a snooze functionality to it. So you are able to send email and not have to think about the emails that you sent and worry about them.
Exactly.
So never have to drop a follow-up. But more importantly, you can actually use it to get rid of a to-do list, because you can make tasks come to you at the best time to actually deal with them.
Oh, I hadn't thought of that, actually. Getting rid of to-do list clutter.
To-do lists are terrible for you. And I'm very, very against to-do lists.
It gives me so much anxiety to look at it. And there's so much stuff that I'm not going to do right now. I'm not going to reprogram my smart TV right now. It's like one day eventually. And it just sits there and it just makes you feel like shit about yourself.
Well, there's actually a name for that. It's called the Zeigarnik effect, actually. It's a voice in our heads that pushes us to finish the unfinished. And unfortunately, when you're looking at a list of things that you can't finish right now, that's a real big problem.
Ooh, this is good stuff. And this is all stuff that's covered in Less Doing, hey?
Yeah, I mean, to some extent or another. I mean, this is a constantly evolving system. So you're getting the freshest content right now.
I love it. The Zygarnik effect, you said.
Yeah, Bluma Zygarnik was a Russian doctoral student in the 1920s.
Ah, that's brilliant. So yeah, coming back to follow up, I really love it. And what's another added benefit we didn't put in, man, I got to get them as a sponsor. But another added benefit is you can get to inbox zero because you just delete things. And after a while, you have faith that it's going to come back to you. And in fact, it can email people for you. So they'll tell me, I need time to decide on this. I say, great, let's talk about it again in 2 weeks. I CC them. And in 2 weeks, we both get a reminder that shows both of us that they were going to make a decision on it. And it's kind of the greatest thing ever. Ari, I'm very curious. I want to ask you kind of a big question, which is, what does your daily routine look like from morning to evening? What are you eating? What are you doing? How are you structuring your time? And before I have you answer that, since it's a big question, I'm going to take a quick second and let our audience know about our sponsors. I just want to let you guys know that this episode is brought to you by my best-selling online course, Become a Speed Demon: Productivity Tricks to Have More Time. The course is the culmination of over a decade of my own experience and research into productivity theory, strategies, tips, and tricks. From how to prioritize and structure your life, to computer hacks and tips to automate your daily work, and even ways to shave time off the basic tasks we all do every day. The course is guaranteed to save you at least 3 hours a week or your money back. So for a 90% off coupon, check it out at jle.vi/productivity. That's http://jle.vi/productivity. All right, guys, we are back with Mr. Ari Meisel, and he's going to let us know what a day in his life looks like.
Yeah, so that's kind of a tough one because there's 2 days of my week that are similar and then 5 days that are not.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I only work 2 days a week, and that's by design. And that's, to be clear, those are the days. So it's Monday and Wednesday from 9:30 to about 5 is my work week.
Wow.
And that is the only times that I'm working in the business. That's the only times that I'm having meetings or podcast interviews or calls with coaching clients, whatever it might be. The rest of the time, I'll still deal with emails and I'll still deal with things on my phone when I need to, but primarily those 5 days are for my wife and kids.
Oh, wow.
And I have 3 young boys that I just spend all that time with. So yeah, again, it's that limit, so I work my butt off. Like today is Monday and I have 9 back-to-back appointments and it's great. I don't eat. I have a huge breakfast and I just kind of go. And that's a typical Monday and Wednesday. Other than that, it's sort of a grab bag. Most days I start at 5 in the morning when one of the kids wakes up. And what I eat, a lot of times I'll skip breakfast, actually, just because of convenience. Or I'll have like a late breakfast, 10:30, 11 o'clock. And again, I try to do high fat as much as possible. So today I had breakfast and it was huevos rancheros, which is my absolute favorite breakfast.
Yeah.
I love huevos rancheros when it's done right. And so guacamole and eggs and some sort of good meat, like lots of butter, those kinds of things. Dinner, I'd say 95% of the time we're cooking at home and having lunches or dinners at home. But yeah, basically Monday and Wednesday is just work. And then the other days are family stuff.
I have to say, I am super, super impressed because you're very prolific. You're very active in your field. And if you would have told me you worked 6 days a week, I would have believed you.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, I mean, this is what I had to do. So it keeps me centered. Again, I work really hard on these 2 days, but I get a break day in between. And then by Sunday, I've sort of had enough of the kids a little bit and it's good to get back to work on Monday. And so it works out really well.
Yeah, we'll hope they don't listen to podcasts, right?
Yeah. Well, they're all under 4 years old, so I think we're okay.
Okay. So we're okay for a couple of years until they get iPhones and, dig up that episode Dad was on.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so I'm starting to get a picture. Essentially, you do this. At one point, you did it because you have to. Now you do it because you can, because it's still a matter of health. So, Ari, I love that you wrote a book called Intro to Biohacking, and biohacking is a pretty loaded term, and there's guys like David Asprey, and there's a lot to that. We had a guy on the show for whom biohacking meant implanting RFID chips in his hands. We've had people who, do a massive blood panel every month. What does biohacking mean to you, and how are you doing it?
So it's funny. I'm assuming you've seen the movie Limitless, right?
Of course.
Okay, so you know how at the end of the movie he stopped taking the drugs, but he's still getting more and more powerful?
Yeah.
Right. So that's kind of how I see things now. I don't do a lot of the tracking that I used to, but I feel that I've become so much more in tune with my body that I'm able to do things that I wasn't necessarily able to do before. I do a pretty extensive blood panel every 3 months or every quarter. And it's funny because every time I walk into the doctor, I go to a doctor to do it, that it's like a group. So I always see someone different. So every time I hand them this long list and they're like, really? You want to do all this? Are you sure? What about this one? And I'll usually throw a couple extra in there so that I can, it's like a negotiation, so it's like, okay, fine. We don't have to do that one. And that one's okay, but do these other 26.
Oh, wow.
I do that. I'm looking a lot at like cholesterol and blood sugar because I am having a high fat diet, and my cholesterol is fantastic, by the way, but sugar is something I'm always interested in, and inflammatory markers like C-reactive protein. But I love testing myself for things. So 3 weeks ago, I did a neurotransmitter test with urine and saliva, which was done at home. Right now on my shelf in the box, I have a test sitting ready for me that is to test heavy metal detox in my body. The only problem with that is that you have to stop eating fish for a week to do the test, and fish is a big part of my diet, so I just keep putting it off. But to me, biohacking is really changing your environment to improve your life in some way or another. So if that means taking some sort of smart drug, actually right now, for the first time, I'm testing out Ben Greenfield's Nature CBD.
Oh, cool. We just had him on the show, actually.
Oh, cool. So this is the first time I've ever taken cannabidiol, which for people who don't know is the non-psychoactive component of marijuana. So THC gives you the altered state, and CBD gives you all of the medicinal benefits without the altered state. So that is what I am on.
Oh, that's cool. I was actually going to ask what supplements you're taking, so I'm glad to know. And funny, Ben didn't even mention that he had this product. I guess that's humility for you.
Yeah, it's relatively new, so we'll see. I feel pretty good.
Very cool.
But I'm testing things all the time. That's the thing. To me, biohacking is testing. You're always testing, experimenting, and seeing how you can change things. There's never like a status quo.
If I put the dots together, I'm going to guess that you're using Evernote to track results over time. Would I be correct?
You are correct.
Awesome. I love that.
I love Evernote. It's the external brain for me. That's what I call it.
Oh, yes. I actually literally just now got Anthony Metivier to download it because we're formatting this course. I was like, dude, just put everything in your brain in this thing and it'll work. It's totally awesome, which is tough because he has, 183 memory palaces with like 7 languages, but still. Let me ask you this, Ari, what are some of the most impactful tests or hacks that you've done? If our audience wants to go out right now and say, you know what, I want to try this biohacking testing thing. It sounds like it makes sense. Where do they start?
I got a really simple one for you. Most people have, that's not fair, not most people, but a lot of people nowadays have some sort of trouble sleeping. Mm-hmm. And my number one sleep hack, which is cheap, doesn't hurt anything, and you'll see an improvement the first time you try it, is to wear a pair of blue blocking sunglasses for about an hour before you go to bed.
Oh, dude, I love that.
So most people are looking at their screens or TVs and whatnot, and the blue spectrum light there is affecting their ability to produce melatonin. Mm-hmm. So all you have to do is wear a pair of blue blocking sunglasses before you go to bed. And the first night you try it, you will sleep better.
Totally. I love that one. That's a tip that I use myself. And then, you get the F-Lux on the devices. And if you want to go really, really extreme with it, you get the Philips Hue color changeable lights, and you have them automatically fade to red at 7:00, and then that whole deal. So I'm with you on the melatonin hack.
Yes, absolutely. That's the number one. But a lot of people don't do a full blood panel. Most people go to the doctor and they get what do they call it now? I'm blanking. I don't do the regular one, but basically they'll test your cholesterol and your vitamin. They won't even test vitamin D levels. So it's usually like cholesterol and resting glucose and stuff like that. But you can get 20, 30 different markers tested that are really impactful.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You want to get your testosterone tested. If you're a guy, you want to make sure you're getting your triglycerides tested.
Yeah. And by the way, sorry, that's a good thing you mentioned that. You should get your hormone levels tested as soon as possible, especially if you're young, because later on in life, if you ever have some issue, you want to be able to try to get back to a level that you were at when you were young and strong and healthy. And a lot of people don't have that information.
Totally.
Yeah. So if you're a guy, you want to know what your testosterone was in your 20s.
Although I do want to throw out a point on that because I had a pretty kind of nasty experience with this, which is the healthy range, quote unquote, in a lot of American hospitals is between 200 and 1200.
I know.
So I go in at 24. I'm lifting weights every day. I'm not getting bigger. My sex drive, not so great for a 21, 22-year-old. Can I get my T tested? She goes, yeah, we tested. It comes back 563 NGDL. And she's like, this is perfectly fine. It's within the healthy range. Well, yeah, it's within the healthy range for a 35 or 40-year-old guy. It's not within the healthy range for a 21-year-old guy who's sexually active, who's lifting every day.
You should have been well over 800.
Exactly. I mean, even today, I don't have exceptionally high T. I think I'm at 671 or something like that, 7-8 years later. But I mean, what a difference that would have made, at least in my sex life, if not in my physical fitness,
Well, I got down to 200 something because I was on really strong meds and they were just disrupting all sorts of things. And within a couple months of better diet, high fat is a really good thing for testosterone, but I got way back up to like almost 900.
Right. And testosterone, I mean, is a super drug, even for the ladies listening. I mean, obviously you don't want to have too high T if you're a man or a woman, but everybody needs it. And it is, you talk about strength, you talk about confidence, you talk about mental clarity.
Drive. I mean, just having your drive.
Exactly. Get out of bed, and the aggression to grab life by the horns, it all comes down to testosterone. And if your testosterone's low, you're just going to be miserable. Just miserable.
Yep.
It's not hard. You don't have to be injecting all kinds of steroids and trenbolone into your ass cheeks to pick it up. Eat a high-fat diet. Make sure you have enough selenium. Lift heavy weights. Sleep well. It's not rocket science.
That's right.
This is a tough question. I apologize in advance, but what's one question that I haven't asked you that I really should have?
Oh, I hate and love that question at the same time.
It's like I want to get all the good, juicy stuff out of you that you're afraid someone would ask you on an interview, and that's what's going to hopefully bubble to the surface.
Well, I mean, I'm a pretty open book, so there's nothing that's too fearful for me. But, I mean, you could ask about how people can learn more about less doing.
Yeah, that's a good question. I usually save that one for the end, but let's dive right into that one. How can people learn more about less doing?
So, I mean, everything is at lessdoing.com, but when I do these kinds of interviews, I like to offer your audience something special, which is if they go to lessdoingcall.com, they can actually sign up for a free 30-minute call with one of my Less Doing certified coaches who I've trained them all myself. And it's not a sales call. It's a legitimate productivity coaching call, and they can really help them get started on the path to inbox zero or better time management or even hacking their wellness to some extent.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and then if they're interested, of course, then they can find out about the coaching programs like my boot camp or my mastermind, but they're going to get some real value on those calls.
That's fantastic. But they have to know that they're only going to be able to attend on Mondays and Wednesdays, right?
No, I don't do those calls. So those are available much more often than I am.
Fantastic. Okay. We really appreciate that. So we'll add that. That is lessdoingcall.com. We'll add that to the show notes. Let me ask you a couple more questions, Ari, before I let you go. What is, and this is kind of more of a rapid fire question format, I guess. What's one thing that you believe to be true that other people think is crazy?
That you can do an hour of work a day, honestly. I'd say most people think that I'm crazy when I say that, but then as I start to explain and show them how it's possible, I usually get somewhere. But that's a big one. People just seem to have this idea that you have to work 8 hours a day no matter what you're doing. Mm-hmm. And they're wrong, and they're doing themselves a disservice.
I think you're absolutely right. It's funny that I teach a course in productivity, and yet if I don't get in 3 or 4 hours of work a day, I think it's more a psychological hurdle. I think that I feel guilty more than anything, and I feel like things are out of control. My father, if he doesn't watch at least an hour and a half of news a day, he feels like the world has suddenly tumbled out of control, and he's lost his grip on reality. And that's how I feel about sitting and staring at my email and hitting refresh.
Yeah, my dad is the same way, and it's really frustrating because it's like he just gets himself riled up about things he can't do anything about. So
that's absolutely true. Okay, so that's one thing that other people think is impossible or unbelievable. Another rapid fire question. If you could assign one piece of homework, whether it's a reading assignment or an exercise or even a thought experiment for our audience to try throughout the week, what would that homework be?
So set some sort of limit on yourself, and wherever that could be. It could be in a physical space. It could be in a digital space. It could be in terms of time. But look at something that you're doing on a regular basis and just think, what if I did this much less and then go in even less than that? So whatever it is, I'm only going to allow myself to do email for an hour a day, or I'm only going to make 2 phone calls today, or I'm only going to use my phone for 60 minutes today. Any of those kinds of things. Or you have a closet full of crap, or you have a room full of paper. I'm only allowed to have this one folder of paper. What would have to happen to make that possible?
I love that limitation thinking as a way of generating innovation and a way of generating kind of creative solutions. So that's the homework. I'm actually going to do that homework too.
Good. Well, I mean, so you know who Dan Sullivan is, right? The strategic coach?
I'm afraid I don't, actually.
Oh, okay. All right. So he's like the number one top entrepreneur coach for 40 years. He's coached like 40,000 entrepreneurs. And he says something which I think is very apt, which is that 2x thinking is very bad for your brain, whereas 10x thinking is really good. So what he means by that is that if you're trying to think how you can double your business, it's too linear. That's too obvious to say, okay, well, we just have to ramp up sales by 20% and cut costs by 10%. No, if you're thinking, how can I 10x my business? That requires you to be crazy. And I really think outside the box and come up with things that don't exist or that haven't worked before necessarily or that nobody's ever thought of. So it's the same thing when you're coming up with those limits.
That's a really, really interesting thought experiment. I love that one. In fact, I think that should also be homework for our audience. All right, last question, and then we'll rehash on the Less Doing call. What's one book besides your own that you have recommended the most or which has most impacted your life?
Emergency by Neil Strauss.
Ooh, interesting choice. Neil Strauss being of The Game fame, New York Times bestselling author in his own right. Emergency. Okay.
Yeah, it's really about a guy faced with a unusual and uncomfortable situation for himself and really being in uncharted territory and taking the bull by the horns doesn't even cover it, but completely reinventing himself and learning all the new skills that he would need to operate in this sort of world. And it was really inspiring, and I ended up doing a lot of the things that he did in the book as a result. I
love that. All right, I'm going to need to add that to my reading list. Mr. Ari Meisel, I would love to talk to you for another hour and a half, except now I've already taken about 10% of your work week. So I do appreciate your time. I know our audience is going to love this episode. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to get in touch with Mr. Ari Meisel and learn about what he is doing and claim that free call, you can go to lessdoingcall.com or check out the show notes. Ari, thank you very, very much. It's been such a pleasure. I hope we do keep in touch. You and I have far too much in common to not keep in touch.
Absolutely, John. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Take care, my friend.
Thanks for tuning in to the Becoming Superhuman podcast. For more great skills and strategies, or for links to any of the resources mentioned in this episode, visit www.becomingasuperhuman.com/podcast. We'll see you next time.